This interview is in support of Witham Radio. Please consider donating to the cause. Link in description. Hello and welcome to the Cyberden with your host, me, Jake the Voice. And it looks like we're back at it with more interviews, not from Siren Radio, because Siren Radio is sadly no more. We're doing new interviews to support Witham Radio. Anyway, let's get to chatting with our lovely guest today. Please welcome Noah Dickinson, aka Awesreek, better known as the creator and lead developer of the super crazy boomer shooter Viscerafest. Thanks for coming, mate.
No problem. How's it going?
Not bad, not bad. Good to have some more people on board for the Cyberden's interviews after a year, actually. It's been a whole year.
Yeah, I think the last one I listened to was, I think it was John Galt's, actually, which would have been probably a little further back than a year ago, but...
Yes, good. I think 5 years ago I did, interviewed the late, great John William Galt, voice of the Shadow Warrior himself.
There's actually a period during the game's development where I was actually hoping to bring John Galt on board, if purely for a cameo. That kind of ended up falling through because my composer Marky felt it would be in bad taste, but I wanted to.
Well, Marky was wrong. I'll just leave it at that. Anyway, so let's get the ball rolling and start off with the usual bread and butter question. What got you interested in developing video games?
So when I was 12 years old, well, actually, it goes further back than that. When I was 8 years old, I originally wanted to get into 3D animation. And I remember I had asked my dad to see if he could find me some kind of piece of software that I could use to try and get into animation. He originally found me... I can't remember the application's name. I remember it had like a purple butterfly logo. But there was this old piece of software that I was using for a bit that my dad had found. And a lot of my time with that piece of software was mostly just me messing around because I was 8 and the only documentation on how to use it was like basically the application's manual. And I didn't really have the patience as an 8-year-old to read through all of that. So I didn't get very far. But my dad kind of remembered that I was interested in getting into animation. And one day in 2012, he ended up stumbling across Blender. And he was like, hey, I remember you were interested in getting into animation. Maybe you want to pick this up and give it a look. And I did. And a few months into messing around with it, I found out that Blender had a game engine. And being 12 years old, I was like, you mean I can make video games with this thing? And so that almost immediately became like my dominant interest, was figuring out how to make games. Shortly after, I ended up getting into the first-person shooter genre. The very first FPS game I ever played was Battlefield 1942. And then in 2013, when I was 13, I ended up stumbling across the shareware version of Doom on Newgrounds. It was in a 3-pack bundle with Heretic and Hexen. And I kind of from there just developed a love and a fascination for retro shooters. And so originally the game I was working on was something more of like a Halo clone. Because after Battlefield 1942, I pretty quickly found Halo and got super into Halo, even though I wasn't allowed to play it. So my foray into making games kind of started with me trying to make a Halo clone. And that later developed into around like 2013, 2014 into me trying to make a retro shooter.
Let's, of course, delve into your brainchild, Viscerafest. What was the inspiration for this really wacky, crazy shooter?
You say inspiration like there's one. Like I said, it originally started out as something of a Halo clone. In 2013, like I said, I stumbled into Doom, and from there, I kind of just ended up very quickly finding more and more retro shooters. So I think after Doom, I ended up finding Blood. Yeah, so shortly after playing Doom, I ended up finding Blood, and then shortly after Blood, I found Bungie's original Marathon. And those three games, I think, kind of kicked off a lot of what Viscerafest would eventually become. Um, but a lot of my interests and my tastes kind of just kept spiraling in all kinds of different directions, and they kept kind of pouring into the development of the game. Like I have a big love for 3D platformers and collectathons, and the idea of like introducing collectibles and unlockables in the context of the game was something that I wanted to push for. In general, like I remember I was even talking with my bud Fireplant, who worked with me on the game. Like the whole shop system to where you can buy like cheat codes and gameplay modifiers and stuff was very much born from like a love of like early 2000s, late 90s games where you'd have like you'd play and either earn some kind of currency, or just by progressing through the game you'd unlock skins or cheat codes or whatever it happens to be, and injecting a lot of those ideas into the game. There's some Rise of the Triadisms, which we put into Viscerafest. There is still a dominant Halo influence in the game, especially from an artistic standpoint. And some of that's shared even with Marathon. The game, I mean, obviously, the build engine games played a very big hand in influencing it. And yeah, I mean, I could keep going. Like in 2016, I got super big into H.P. Lovecraft. I think that was around the time I first read the book The Call of Cthulhu, and then shortly after The Call of Cthulhu, I found the book The Dunwich Horror. And so I like overnight developed like a fascination and a love for H.P. Lovecraft's work. And so that got poured into the game, and I think even my love for H.P. Lovecraft like initially started with Quake, because I was really starting to get into Quake, and I remember hearing someone saying that Quake was heavily inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, and I was like, hey, I never heard the guy, but I figure I'll listen to one of his books while I think I was working on school, and I loved it. Yeah, so like again, just inspiration in all kinds of different directions. Like the art direction, like I'm sure a lot of people look at Viscerafest and think like the art was inspired by like Doom or whatever. It wasn't. Like obviously aspects of how the game's presentation functions in game is pulled from Doom, but like having 2D sprites in the context of a 3D environment. But the fact that we went a pixel art direction was actually predominantly inspired by games like Hyper Light Drifter, for example, which you could even see is where the game gets a lot of its, shall we say, strong color choices. And so yeah, like again, like it's hard to pin down one thing other than retro shooters broadly, and even video games broadly speaking. That because there's so many different little places where influences kind of played a hand in how the game ended up shaping up over the course of time.
Viscerafest has, of course, been in development for quite a bit of time. I think it was, I wouldn't say recently, but a bit of time ago, of course, the full game dropped to the world. Nevertheless, how long has the game been in development for, well, roughly at least, and how would you describe the kind of evolution of the game over the years?
Yeah, so obviously, the game's development started in 2012, very simply. I mentioned that it kind of started as a Halo clone, but it was basically what the way it started was I had a number of different projects I was working on. I probably had like two or three different games I was making early on that I would just kind of bounce between depending on where my interests lied from day to day. I had a couple of animation projects I was working on. I had some books I was writing. Like I was just creatively all over the place in my early years. And eventually, what happened was over the course of time, the FPS project kind of took the reins, so to speak. And that FPS project is what developed into Viscerafest. So, like I said, early on, Halo clone. Around 2014, it started shaping more into being a retro shooter. And then I want to say around 2015, it was full bore a retro shooter. In the early years, it was just me working on it. I want to say from basically the project, like I say, the early days of the project were chaos. Like I mentioned, it was like a Halo clone, but even that's not entirely accurate because the from 2012 to 2015, what the project was changed on a like bi-monthly basis. So it started at like all I knew was it was a science fiction themed first person shooter. But beyond that, details were constantly in flux. So it started as more of a Halo clone. At one point, it took a heavy horror direction, being more inspired by games like Dead Space. I dabbled for like half a month with the idea of making like an Amnesia style first person horror game. And that ended up falling through. There was a season where it was like a horde shooter. There was a season where all I knew is it was sci-fi and it was going to be first-person shooter, but details in every other regard were constantly shifting. Around 2014, around 2013 when I started getting into Doom, the idea of making a retro shooter kind of started to come to the forefront a bit. But even then, it wasn't a full-on retro shooter. There were just aspects of it which were inspired by retro shooters, like being able to carry all your weapons at once and whatnot, for example. But then, I want to say by 2014, I fully committed to the idea of it becoming a retro shooter. And 2016, 2017 is when some other folks started to get involved. In 2016, I met Elijah or Fireplant Games. I was helping do some concept art and some character art for an arena shooter by the name of Nexum that was in development at the time. That project kind of died, but he was the lead programmer on it. And we kind of built a bit of a friendship there, and he was interested in working with me on Viscerafest. At the time, because I was working in the Blender game engine, and he was more of a Unity dev, that didn't really take off initially. He didn't come onto the project until like late 2018, which I'll get to in a second. But then we had the artist Sarah Kanayapin, I think came on in 2017. And she did a lot of our promo art. If I remember correctly, I was in the New Blood Discord server, and somebody had mentioned they had a friend who was an artist and needed work because they were out of a job and they needed some kind of financial footing. And so I looked into their body of work. I was really impressed, and I was like, hey, I'd love to work with you to do some art for my game. And so she did some pieces of promotional art for us. I want to say around 2017, 2018. So 2016, briefly, I had a friend who I had met at a summer camp. His name was Dylan Hetfield. And he was big into working in music. And initially, he was going to be the composer for Viscerafest. what ended up happening is he made 2 songs. The first one is called That's Not Healthy, and the second one I can't remember the name of. But after that, just due to the busyness of life, he had to walk away from the project. And so I was in the midst of looking for another composer, and I stumbled across Michael Markey. And I think the way I found him was through his work on the Quake Champions Doom Edition soundtrack. And I saw in a video he posted that he said he had offered to do the music for that mod for free. And so in my mind I was like, oh, he's attainable. He's not like a professional level composer. Like I could reach out to him and he might actually respond. So I reached out to Marky, and we pretty quickly established a working relationship around, again, 2017, 2018. And then in late 2018, I was working on the game. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 were basically done. And I had sent the game out for a few friends to play test it. And the friends I had sent it to, not only were they not able to boot up that version of the game, but older versions of the game that they had access to stopped working when they tried to play the new version of it. And because of that, I kind of reached this point where working on the Blender version of the game, I was like, I can't release this. Like, this is a hot mess. I have absolutely no idea how to fix this. And I was just like, yeah, I can't dig myself out of this one. So I reached out to my buddy Elijah, and I was like, hey, how long do you think it would take to do the bare minimum amount of work to get the game functioning in Unity? And he said he thought it would take about a month. And I was like, well, guess what we're doing? And from that, and actually I should even mention, so like I mentioned, Viscerafest Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 was basically done, and I was in the middle of working on Chapter 3. Me and Elijah, prior, because I was planning on that version of Viscerafest being done soon, we were actually prototyping a sequel for Viscerafest. And that prototype of the sequel is what we used as the foundation to port over the Blender version of Viscerafest into Unity. And then during development, Sarah Kaneapin ended up having to step down. So she did her first cutscene art, and after that she wasn't able to work with us anymore. There's a brief stint where we tried to bring her sister in to help, because her sister was also a big artist. And for health-related reasons, she was not able to continue working with us. And during Chapter 2's development, Marky got super busy with 3D Realms, so we ended up having to bring in another composer. There was a gentleman by the name of Jeff Plays Guitar who was looking for work, and he actually reached out to me initially and was like, hey, I'd love to work with you. And so we brought him on board. And then come development of Chapter 3, he got super busy with other projects similarly to Marky, so we ended up having to bring in a third composer, Jonas Weekly. A general timeline overall, I would say, for the game loosely, and kind of why it took so long. The early days of Viscerafest from 2012 to 2015 were a season where I was just in the middle of trying to figure out what the game was even going to be. And as a result, the project was constantly changing. From 2016 to 2018, I was working on the Blender version of Viscerafest, which was a retro shooter. And then in late 2018, we rebooted the project in Unity. Me and Elijah, that is. From there, both of us were working full-time jobs at that point in time. And as a result, development was just really slow because of our other commitments in life. In 2020, I think we released the first demo for the game. And the game kind of blew up overnight in the wake of us releasing that demo. We later that year attended an event called Realms Deep, and we got a lot of traction from that as well. And through that, Fulcrum Entertainment, who is formerly known as 1C Entertainment, reached out to us, and they effectively wanted to publish Viscerafest. So over the course of the following months, we established basically a contract with them, and kind of figured out the timeline and general plans for the game's development. And that would have been, again, 2020. I think we announced that they were our publisher in the beginning of 2021, and we released into early access in I think it's April of 2021. After that, life happened is the short answer, because the game didn't come out until 2025, so there's like a good 4 years between it going into early access and it coming out. It's hard for me to remember all the specifics and all the details of everything that's happened, but I remember from in 2015, there's a woman I met. We started dating in 2016. I proposed to her in 2020, and in 2021 she left me, which in retrospect I'm very, very grateful for. But obviously at the time, that was quite a hurdle to get over. Beyond that, there were massive technical issues we were dealing with. There were financial issues we were dealing with. There was some turmoil between us and our publisher. There was, just left and right, just things went wrong. And in addition to that, this was our first game for the most part, right? There was a lot of things I had never done before. And without my knowing, I committed to a lot of the technical execution of Viscerafest made the development take longer. For example, all of Viscerafest sprites are hand-drawn rather than using the classic retro shooter method of making 3D models or clay models or whatever it happens to be and posing and animating them that way. And because of that, the process of making sprites took a much longer amount of time because every single frame had to be drawn by hand. And by extension of that, we couldn't do rotational sprites because of how much longer the process took. And there are all kinds of little details and aspects like that bogged down the development process and made it take longer than it really needed to. There's a lot of stuff that we were doing that was fairly ambitious for a first game. And then you compound just everything that was happening in life on top of that. I had family members pass away during development. In one case, my grandma was on death's door, so me and my family basically packed up and flew down to Alabama. Not literally flew down, we drove down, but we bolted down to Alabama to kind of take care of her before she passed. And you have lots of events like that during the game's development. Periods where my computer would be down and I couldn't use it for 2-3 weeks. Unity at one point changed its team sharing software, and that caused us lots of problems. So it was just throughout the entirety of the game's development, it felt like every step of the way, something new would crop up that would bite us in the heel and slow down development. Like I mentioned, at one point, Marky was working with 3D Realms and he wasn't able to continue working with us on the game. And so that slowed us down because now we had to figure out, well, what the heck are we going to do for the music and the sound? Because we don't have somebody to cover those areas anymore. And then we got Jeff Plays Guitar. And then during Chapter 3's development, he wasn't able to come back. So we were well, what are we going to do for the music? And again, every step of the way, it felt like something new popped up to slow us down. So I think it's just a combination of the fact that the game itself is very ambitious. There are aspects of the process to make it that slowed it down. And then you just have the goings on of life in the midst of all of that, which made it a headache. So,
any features or any kind of ideas that you wanted to kind of get implemented into the game, but you either couldn't make it happen or you thought, let's change things up. Aside from, of course, shifting around engines and changing composers on the fly, etc. What other ideas could you kind of pluck into your mind that you think that you were hoping to put into Viscerafest, but ultimately cutting room floor or just scrapped completely?
Yeah, very little, honestly, was ever cut from Viscerafest. Almost every idea we had made it... well, let me rephrase that. There is stuff that was cut from Viscerafest, but the stuff that was cut was usually cut for reasons of, I guess, more design-related reasons. So, for example, Chapter 3's enemy roster went through a crap ton of iteration. Originally, Chapter 3 was originally going to introduce only 8 new enemies. I think in the current version of the full release, we introduced like 11 or 12 new enemies into Chapter 3. But originally there was going to be just like 7 or 8 new enemies that were introduced in Chapter 3. I think we initially made that roster, and I was like, it felt like there were core aspects of the enemy roster that were missing. And so we went through a season of just iterating on the enemy roster over and over and over again, where it was like, we'd make a new enemy, we'd see, hey, does he, like, what roles do we need him to fill? How is he going to cover some of the gaps we have in the enemy roster? We'd play around with him for a bit. Sometimes we would feel that he wasn't up to snuff, and that enemy would get cut, or maybe a different enemy would get cut that we thought wasn't pulling its weight in the roster. And so there were probably like 3 or 4 enemies that didn't end up making it into the final release of the game that were just completely removed. And then there were other enemies whose mechanics and systems just completely changed throughout the course of development. Beyond that, the closest thing to like a cut feature I can think of would be Chapter 3 was originally supposed to be much more horror-oriented than it was in the final release, which to some people might be surprising to hear, but originally there were supposed to be a few more horror sequences present in Chapter 3 than actually ended up making it into the game. And the reason why they got cut was just because of crunch, basically. During Chapter 3's development, Chapter 3 is by far the biggest chapter in the game, and it has the biggest levels in the game, both in terms of length and scale. I think a good way to put it is, you can have a level that's relatively short, but if the scale of its visuals is massive, it will take longer to work on than if you were to have it just, say, like, set on board a space station in a few rooms or whatever, right? Like, if you have a level set in a canyon, that canyon level is probably going to take longer to make than a level set on board a space station, basically. Depending on, and there are various factors that play into that, but... and so Chapter 3 had, like, the ultimate hodgepodge of... There was so much more going on in terms of the scale of the visuals, which made it take longer to make. And there was so much more going on in terms of the length of the levels that made it take longer to make. And this meant that we were constantly butting up against our deadlines during Chapter 3's development. So there were a lot of ideas we had for Chapter 3 that we wanted to do that didn't end up making it into the final game because we were just constantly fighting our deadlines. In tandem with that, there's some examples of I'm trying to think, where was my brain going? There's some areas in Chapter 3 where we initially had to take some shortcuts. Honestly, Chapter 3's development in general was a nightmare. Because we were constantly butting up against the clock, what that effectively meant was we were basically having to leave levels unfinished and then move on and continue working on the level after it, having left the level before it, like, just in a barely playable state. because we just didn't have time. So we were like, okay, at some point we're going to have to circle back around and finish these levels and make them actually playable. And that was like one of the most heartbreaking seasons of development in my life, because it was like I'd be working on these levels and then I'd leave them in this state where they're like barely playable. Like the frame rate was terrible. They looked ugly and awful. There were glitches left and right. Anytime I would send like a presentation to our publisher to show them what the game looked like, I would have to do everything I could to hide as many bugs as possible, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to finish the level. Like there was just stuff like that left and right throughout the course of Chapter 3's development. And it was like, by the time we got to the end of Chapter 3's development, it was like, okay, now we get to go back all the way through and finish those levels. And that meant there were a lot of ideas for Chapter 3 in terms of layout, in terms of some of the ideas we had for the story, mechanically, that ultimately just didn't make it in. And kind of tying in with that, originally I wanted Chapter 3 to have a lot more puzzles than the final release ended up having. For example, we have this mechanic where you lead a sacrifice to an altar in order to progress some way through a level. And originally I wanted to have a lot more interesting and mentally thought-provoking puzzle sequences with that the sacrifice mechanic. The problem is that we were constantly being stretched for time, so I didn't have the time necessary to plot out exactly how those puzzles would function in game. And as a result, in the final release, most of the sacrifice puzzles are really straightforward and really simple. Whereas originally I wanted them to be more complex and to even have more of them than we did. And so there's a lot of stuff like that, particularly in the latter end of development, where not necessarily even stuff getting cut, just ideas I wanted to do that we ended up not being able to even think about doing, right? Because the idea of stuff being on the cutting room floor is usually you're working on something, and either due to time constraints or due to just, again, the various circumstances, that thing is left in an unfinished state and it gets pulled out of the game. With us, it was more a case of we wanted to do this stuff, but we couldn't even begin to think about doing it because we didn't have the time to commit to. The closest thing to something being on the cutting room floor would be, again, like the enemies I mentioned earlier. But beyond that, like everything we made a plan to do and were working on made it into the game in some fashion. There's very little that I would say, like, that hit the cutting room floor, so to speak. Like, there's no levels that we planned that we didn't make. There's no mechanics that we had planned out that we weren't able to include. Most of the enemies we had planned made it into the game, and if they got cut, it's because it's just because they weren't interesting enough and they didn't add enough to the experience to justify their existence. And so, that was kind of the dominant, the prevailing factor, shall we say.
Now let's get talking a bit about, the protagonist of Viscerafest now, Caroline. Now, I want to ask a particular question about her voice actress, Jana Polzin, who I interviewed a handful of years ago. Lovely lady, very talented, of course. But what made you decide on getting Jana on board in particular for the voice of Caroline?
Yeah, so I want to say, oh goodness, that must have been like 2017 I brought Jana Polzin on board. Like, that was so long ago. So, if I remember correctly, I knew I wanted to do like a build engine style protagonist who like spat one-liners and whatnot. I had kind of reached a point where financially I was finally able to start spending money on my game, because I would have been 17 around that point. I had gotten a job in 2016, so I had some money to burn, so to speak. And so I was like, well, I can finally like hire voice actors and stuff for my game. I remember I spent Lord knows how many hours. There are lots of online sites you can go through that effectively you can listen to like the portfolios of some voice actors and whatnot and potentially hire them. One of the primary sites I use is a site called voices.com. And I remember I went through probably like 700 to 800 different portfolios for female actresses for Carolyn. And none of them fit. I think I found maybe one other woman who I thought was okay and might work as Carolyn. But everyone else I was like, nope, 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 nope. Like it's kind of weird, but like the vast majority of female actresses, at least at that time, were that I could listen to their portfolios through. They sounded way too sweet and gentle and sultry, and they didn't have a voice that I could picture as being the game's protagonist for the general personality I had in mind for Carolyn. And then I think I found Jana Polzin's portfolio on voices.com. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, this is the woman. Like I was like the other woman I had like on my back burner. I was like, nope, like this is the one. This is the woman I need to get. Like she is perfect. Like she fits the bill so perfectly for what I need without question. Like I said, I probably went through like, and not even just on voices.com. Like I searched multiple sites, and by the time I found Jana Bolson, I had probably gone through like 600 to 800 different portfolios. And that, like, as soon as I heard her, I was like, yeah, this is the one. Like, it can't be anybody else.
Would you say you have any favorite one-liners of Caroline's? Anything that perhaps comes to mind, makes you smile or laugh each time?
So there is one-liner that's actually a reference to Redneck Rampage. It turns out I had completely misheard what the original one-liner was, so it's not actually a direct quote. The original one-liner in Redneck Rampage is, I'm busier than a one-legged man at an ass-kicking contest. But the way I heard it, and the way I had Jana Polson say it in Viscerafest, was you fight like a one-legged man in at an ass-kicking contest. But yeah, I'm trying to think. Probably my favorite... It's not a one-liner, but one of the things so fun story, I was listening to Jana Polson's portfolio, and as I was listening to her portfolio, one of the things that stuck out to me is she had a number of tracks of her singing, and her singing voice, I was like, it's amazing. I was like, I have to use that. Originally, I planned to have a bunch of like idle lines of dialogue for like Carolyn being like bored if the player was standing around not doing anything. And I was like, I'm just going to replace all of those with Jana singing songs. And so some of them I grabbed and pulled straight from Blood. And funny enough, I ended up actually falling in love with a lot of the songs that Caleb sings in Blood. Like there's the song... what's it called? Everybody Loves Somebody Sometimes. I love that song. But that's a song I included Jana Polson singing. But the one, my favorite line that Jana recorded was it was for a really quirky reference. There's a movie that was made here in Wisconsin, I believe, called Top Secret. Or at least the directors are like Wisconsin natives. And I can't remember the lead actor's name, but he sings a song called Skeet Shooting. And I was like, I've got to include that in the game. So there's a recording we have Jana for one of her idle lines of dialogue where she sings the song Skeet Shooting. So that would probably be my favorite.
It's funny you should mention that. I think maybe during the interview with Jana that I had. Again, I'm hoping my memory is not playing tricks on me like it sometimes does, but I remember either I spoke to her about it or I had this idea about, of course, those kind of idle singing one-liners that of course, uh, Caroline does in game, similar to the way, of course, Caleb does it from Blood. And of course, some people might know about my voice acting shenanigans and how I do a half decent impression of Caleb from Blood. Just standing around going, "Everybody knows somebody sometimes. Not me, baby." Things like that. And I think I might have proposed to her or someone else, or maybe you, I can't remember. But having like those little singy songs that she does, and then I kind of like join in as Caleb and make it sound like a back and forth karaoke duet. But I never actually did that. I never pulled it off. That's my memory in a nutshell. I remember things 5 years too late and go, oh, darn, I wish I wrote that down.
Yeah. So actually, I have a bit of a funny thing to add to that. So there was a point in time where I was trying to get Stephen Waite to do voice acting for Viscerafest. Um, This would have been during Chapter Three's development. But there was a character in the game that I wrote specifically for Stephen Waite. And that character is the bounty hunter Amal Kador that appears in Chapter 1. I reached out to Stephen Waite, and we started going through the process of beginning to plan in order so that I could work with him. There are a couple of problems, though. One, at that time, I was pretty financially tight. There was a lot going on in life. Working on Viscerafest had been my sole job, and it was making me basically nothing in regards to money. And I didn't have another job I was working around that time because I couldn't afford to with how tight our scheduling was. So I was pinching pennies. And a part of the problem is that Stephen Waite doesn't have his own recording set up. In order to work with Stephen Waite, he has to fly down to you, and then you have to basically record. You have to rent out a recording booth that you and him will meet at, and then you will go and do recording sessions at. And then he was like, I think it was like $600 an hour to work with Stephen Waite, on top of the price of the prices you're going to be paying for the recording booth. And I was just like, yeah, like it's not worth it to bring, like just financially at the time, I couldn't justify doing it, unfortunately. So it kind of sucked. Because yeah, I almost had Stephen Waite in Viscerafest, but yeah, I was in the midst of, it was a really hard call, but I just reached a point where I went back to his agent and I was like, I can't do this. Like financially, it's too much of a risk for me to take on board, and there will probably be too little financial blowback or benefit from even doing it to justify the cost. So I was just like, yeah, I can't commit to doing this. But I did get to talk to him a little bit, and that was fun.
Shame it didn't happen, but we can at least use our imaginations just to imagine how it might have gone down. Also, slight break here for anyone tuning in, just in case you need a Stephen Waite sound-alike in terms of especially Caleb from Blood. There is this fantastic voice actor I know, just letting you know, folks. I think his name's Jake the something the voice? I don't know, something like that. Anyway, getting back on topic. So, what are your thoughts on, of course, the fan response, especially to, getting back on board with the questions about Caroline of Viscerafest specifically. Thoughts on people having a crush on Caroline and be like, oh, she's so cute and pretty and stuff like that. Those nerds.
Yeah. My goodness. I feel like it's been a while since that's even really been a thing in our community. Um, kind of the game really blew up around the demo days. And because of how long development took, a lot of interest really died down over time. In general, the release kind of felt like a wet fart. There's just barely any motion within the context of our community. And we've got a couple of big mainstays within our community who are currently present, but beyond that, since release, things have been pretty quiet. There's not even been that kind of a fandom around the game for a good long while. I want to say, goodness, it's probably been like at least since 2023, since I can recall people having that kind of a response to Carolyn. I'd say the vast majority of people, she's an intentionally quirky looking character, shall we say. We were very much striving for, we wanted her to be aesthetically appealing, but we also wanted it to be clear that she was not human. And that meant we were kind of striving for something of an uncanny valley vibe with her. And I'd say, that means that people have a bit of mixed reactions to her appearance. Where you do have some people who find her attractive, but I'd say a lot more people kind of look at her like she's a bit freaky. A bit freaky. For me personally, I'm mostly indifferent to it. I don't really care. I prefer people not make the shall we say the funny unnameable art of her, but that's neither here nor there, and it doesn't seem like that's happening, because it certainly I check online, like what people are saying and posting about the game online pretty frequently, and thankfully I've not seen anything like that as of recent, mostly because I've not seen much of anything being posted about the game at all. I wouldn't say it doesn't really bother me or faze me very much. But yeah.
For the record, I still say she's a cutie pie to me. Regardless of the horrendous kind of tentacles pouring out and the lashing of teeth and the ultra violence and etc. I can look past that. I am not a shallow person. Jake the Voice is not a shallow person, folks. You can take my word for it. Take my word for it.
Oh dear.
Don't worry, I'm not that crazy for her, but I wouldn't mind sitting down and having a chat and, like a friendly, chummy chat. Anyway, moving swiftly on, of course. So, as you say about, you said, of course, the release of the game was kind of unfavorably kind of described it as a wet fart. So, with that in mind, how would you say just in general, with the full release of the game, how has it been with, the critics' responses, the big YouTubers' responses, the fan reviews and responses, and just in general, do you feel satisfied with, the full release, how it's dropped and people's feedback on it? Do you feel happy about it, that it's finally, done and dusted?
How I feel about the game's release and how I feel about, I guess you could say, the reaction to it are two very different answers. Personally speaking, I'm very, very happy with how the game itself has turned out. The only qualm that really remains for me with the game is the fact that the soundtrack isn't done yet. And that's mostly because of circumstances beyond our control. We're hoping to have the soundtrack done within the next few months, but a lot of that's going to depend heavily on our composer situation. Excuse me, I just burped. Beyond that, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, the community response, I would say, has been mostly positive. There's a very vocal minority who does not like the game, but that has always been the case, and it's always going to be the case. Honestly, I'm kind of shocked that the game isn't more divisive than it is, because there's a lot of, shall we say, very strong creative decisions that we made on Viscerafest that I can see alienating a lot of players. And oddly enough, it doesn't seem like it has to the extent that I would expect. I think currently we're sitting at like an 89% positive on Steam, so we're doing pretty good. Um, I want to say, again, it's been pretty positive overall as far as like the actual critical and player feedback goes. Um, there are detractors, but like that's always going to be the case. And a lot of those are people who just don't like what the game is trying to do and trying to be. But yeah, a lot of it is felt very quiet, I would say, is the big thing. And so there's a sense in which I'm kind of not happy with the release because, I mean, yeah, like it really doesn't feel like anything has changed now that the game has come out, I think is a good way to put it. Like, my life feels almost like I have more time now. I'm not as pressured by development in the way that I was before the game released. But beyond that, it really doesn't feel like anything has changed. There was no, like, release hype around the game coming out, with the exception of a few people here and there. Just because of how long the game took to come out. Like we were riding the wave of the excitement of the retro shooter subgenre coming back very early on. And as of now, a lot of that excitement has completely fizzled out. And by proxy, the excitement around the game has fizzled out. I don't know that I would go back and change anything per se, because I simply don't think the game would be as good if we, rushed it out to try and get it out sooner. If we made cut corners and did, whatever else. It's definitely there's a very real sense in which it's disappointing, because I recall what it was like when the initial demo released. And there was so much more excitement and enthusiasm in the air surrounding that release than there was the final release. And there were so many people making fan art for the game and like contributing to the community and people pouring in. And none of that came back when the game finally came out. It was there during the demo days. It fizzled out throughout the early access period. And come the full release, it's just gone. There's just none of it. And so that aspect of it is really disappointing. I was hoping that our community would come back in force, and it just didn't happen. Not even in the wake of like Civi making a new video covering it or anything like that. So it was fairly disappointing. I'm very happy with the game itself. There's not a ton I would change. I'm personally fairly satisfied with the state of the game, even if there's still things we need to fix and address, and we need to finish the soundtrack. I'm very, very happy with the game I made, which in essence was my primary goal. Like, for me, at the end of the day, the goal was to make a game that I myself would want to play, because, obviously I can't in good conscience sell something to someone that I am not myself proud of and would want to play and could convince myself was a good game, right? And so a very real goal for me was just making sure that, I myself am happy and would want to play the game I made. And I can say that that's the case. But, again, the community side of things is a bit of a disappointment.
So, looking ahead now towards perhaps a more hopeful future, what kind of Viscerafest-related content might you like to see happen? Whether it's a sequel, a spin-off, Steam Workshop, maybe something a bit more left field, maybe something like, I don't know, soundtrack remix albums, or Caroline cameos in other games, etc. What would you ideally like to see happen with the future of Viscerafest?
Not much. So We're currently in the midst of working on a big New Game Plus mode, which will basically be an entirely rebalanced version of the main campaign, where basically we'll have late game enemies and weapons scattered throughout the entirety of the campaign. In addition to that, we're going to be adding some unlockable bonus levels. But as far as the Viscerafest as a franchise continuing in any way, I simply don't imagine it happening. And there are lots of reasons for that. That's kind of a conclusion I reached way back in like 2021, 2022. Viscerafest narratively is kind of, in a way, set up to have two games. A Viscerafest 1, which sort of builds up to an inevitable reality that is paid off in its sequel. The thing with that, though, is that within the context of the first game, the way the second game ends is just kind of inevitable. Like it's telegraphed pretty hard what's going to happen, and the second game would just be effectively us paying those ideas off. So there's a very real sense in which I don't feel like the second game needs to exist, because again, it would just be realizing what we've already communicated what will happen in that game anyways. Beyond that, I don't think people would like the sequel, to be honest. Viscerafest 2 would not have a happy ending, nor would it be a happy game in general. Tonally, it would be a much, much different experience from the first game. I know generally front to back what would happen narratively within it. Some of the details I haven't quite ironed out, but I could like sit down and theoretically just write like a book or like a script for what would happen in the second game. Like I have it generally plotted out that much, and I'll be honest, I just don't think people would like it, because I think a lot of the community's vision of the game, its story, the characters, is very different from my vision of those things. And as a consequence of that, I don't think people would like the end destination for the characters and the story in general. In addition to that, I really just... the Viscerafest is a very tightly designed experience. Front to back, there is no fluff, there is no bloat. And everything is kind of, for the most part, perfectly realized in my mind. Like, there are some things I could tweak here or there, but there's nothing that I would add to Viscerafest. There's nothing I would change about it. If I were to make a sequel, there's nothing new I could add without removing something old. And there's nothing that I would add, or everything I could add, rather, would fundamentally alter some aspect of how the game itself plays. At which point, the question for me becomes, why make a sequel and not just an entirely new franchise? Because in a sequel for Viscerafest, I would either have to make just more Viscerafest or explore a completely different direction that is barely recognizably tied to the first game anyway. You know, like you could say the jump from like Doom Eternal to Doom the Dark Ages, right? Like that didn't really need to be within the context of the same franchise. Mechanically, there's barely any tie over. And for me, the question becomes, okay, well, at that point, why would I not just make it another franchise? I just don't have any ideas for how I would continue to build mechanically on Viscerafest, because there just is no need to mechanically build on Viscerafest. It is what it is, and it can't really be improved in my mind. At least it can't be improved. The ways in which it could be improved are the kind of ways I would improve it in a patch, you know? Excuse me. And, yeah, so even beyond that, the franchise is somewhat tied to our current publisher to a certain extent. They own the publishing rights to the first game, and if we were to make a second game, we would have to pitch it to them. And I'll be honest, I'm not I don't really want to continue to work with my current publisher more than I have to, and I don't really think they want to work with me more than they have to. Uh, and as a result of that, I don't really desire like I have no desire to make the sequel. I have no game ideas for how I would make the sequel, and story wise, I just don't think people would like it. It's kind of just in this state of it's a game I don't want to make. It's a game I don't think people would like, and it's that leave it at that. So I really don't have any future plans for Viscerafest as a franchise. Viscerafest the game, we've got some updates planned for, but beyond the borders of Viscerafest 1, I really don't see any need to continue it.
I definitely appreciate the refreshingly honest, kind of upfront responses you're giving here, Noah. So thank you very much for that. I was going to actually ask about, are there any other projects that you might like to work on someday, even if they're just, pipe dream kind of, that would be a lovely kind of thing if the stars aligned kind of ideas, or any kind of more realistic ideas, anything like that? What would you like to hopefully work on?
Yeah, so currently we are actually in the midst of kind of prototyping another game. Kind of the idea is to take some of the basic framework we've established for Viscerafest and kind of use it as a springboard to make something else. I've already experimented with working with 3D models to make sprites, and I'm really happy with the results. We've managed to make some systems for sprites that will allow us to do full 3D rotation, a full set of like 8 rotations for sprites and whatnot. So kind of improving there. The next project we have in mind would be a first-person shooter, but it would be very different from Viscerafest. Very, very different. And tonally, it would be much more lighthearted than Viscerafest. In general, we'd be aiming for something much more arcadey and just goofy fun than what we did with Viscerafest. I don't want to get... we generally have a good idea of what the game itself is going to be, but I don't want to talk about it too publicly yet. I kind of want to wait until it's a bit further down the pipeline, because it's very, very, very early in its genesis overall. And so I'm kind of hesitant to be like this is the thing we're working on now. But overall, I imagine kind of my plan in general is if I continue in game development at all, it's going to be purely as a hobby. I have a lot I want to pursue in the context of my faith as a Christian. I have a lot I want to pursue in terms of the context of I want to get married, I want to start a family, I'd like to be able to adopt kids. I have a lot that to me is far more important to pursue in life than continuing to make games. And in light of that fact, I think there's a very real possibility that a day will come where I just drop everything I'm doing here and I will move to pursue the things in life that are of much more importance to me. I enjoy and I love making games. I enjoy the creative process. I love and I'll honestly probably always have something that I'm artistically pouring myself into. But for me, that's moved more and more into being a secondary part of my life. And it's a secondary part of my life that sucks up so much time and so much effort, and it drains me. And it's something that I've found is continually more and more difficult to justify pouring myself into. There's a lot I feel I need to work on in the context of my character. There's a lot I feel like I'd love to get more involved in doing community work of some kind, of helping the poor, of pouring myself into just helping others, of pouring myself into my church, again, starting and pouring myself into a family. Uh, and there's a very real sense in which, again, if I continue to do games, I think it's going to be purely as a hobby. Right now, I'm kind of committed to seeing Viscerafest through to its end. And so there is still a pretty big time commitment I have to set aside to focus on Viscerafest. Um, but beyond that, I really don't see. I don't see myself having, shall we say, a rich future in game development, uh, because I think, yeah, I've just reached this point where I'm like, it's a secondary part of my life, and it's a secondary part of my life that I would be happy to cut off and move on from, because I've reached a point where I'm like, there are so many more important things I need to be pursuing. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at, I'd say, mentally. But again, I love doing it, and and if I can, I'd love to continue doing it.
Well, Noah, let me just say, on behalf of, I'm sure, many of the Cyberden listeners right here, that whatever path that you take, I sincerely, absolutely hope that there will be nothing but happiness, joy, and safety, whether you're going down the path of making games, or following your faith, or something, I don't know, completely altruistic, or family-oriented, whatever it is. I hope you stay safe, and that all those dreams come true, and that everything is okay for you, mate.
Yeah. Well, I think even for me, like, how do I put this? For me, there's an aspect to where I think everything I do ought to sort of pour forth from my faith, and so there's a sense in which I don't individually view these things as maybe separate from one another. There's a sense in which I think, building and creating things that are beautiful and well designed kind of functions as a means to point back to God, and functions as a means to give him glory. The life I live, helping and serving others, building a family, like all these things in my mind are fundamentally tied back to my faith in some way, shape, or form. The question for me is maybe less of one of, it's more so, where should I put my focus is maybe a better way to put it. Because in some way, shape, or form, again, I think all of them tie back to my faith in some way, shape, or form, or at least they ought to. And there are certainly areas where I can grow in the midst of that, areas where I think maybe I've made moral compromise, or there have been decisions I've made that have compromised aspects of my character that I need to grow in. But all of it, I'd say, kind of ought to pour forth from the same place. And so for me, the question is less one of like, what route will I chase in life? And more so a case of, given where I am in the context of my life, what area of my life needs to take focus, right? The concern with me in the context of game development is, as I'm sure you're aware, it's a big time sink. And, if you want to pursue building a family, if you want to pursue building a community, or building into your community rather, and helping others, time kind of goes out the window. And so you need to start prioritizing and figuring out what can I afford to pour myself into. And again, that's a part of why I would say it would probably move more so to being a hobby, but still something that I would say is like a central part of my life, because again, like in a sense, it functions as an expression of my faith in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I was going somewhere with that, but my brain kind of farted.
That's okay. Like I say, as I said earlier, I hope whatever path you take, whatever you choose in life, that it'll be nothing but happiness and joy, and of course, putting that faith of yours into it and hopefully getting something even greater out of it. With that being said, of course, if you ever do continue to go down the game development route, might want to consider keeping your faith in a certain voice actor I know that could be of of use or of interest. I think his name is Jake the something the voice. I don't know. Just keep that in mind. I'll give that guy a call if you ever need him. You never know.
I see.
2 shameless plugs in 1 interview. I'm on fire, baby! Anyway, all right. Let's round and wrap this up with, first, I like to share this little question with my interviewees. So, when you're not working on games, how do you like to unwind?
Usually, that's a tough one. Playing games is typically how I spend my free time per se. So I guess you could say, in a sense, it's how I relax. Beyond that, usually reading. As of late, I would say, or spending time with friends. I'm trying to think. It's kind of hard to say. I'd say, really, at the end of the day, it's probably just playing games. That's the dominant way I unwind. Which is funny because I feel like most of the people who I talk to who are game developers, they sort of grow a bit of a harboring hatred for games in a sense, where it's like, I can't play these things because I just don't enjoy them anymore. Where the process of having worked on them sucks out your ability to enjoy them. Whereas for me, I would say it's sort of enriched my appreciation of them. I would say I'm probably more critical of what I play now than I used to be since I'm a game designer, because I'm thinking about things much more from a designer's perspective, and shortcomings in that regard stand out to me much more. But at the same time, there are things I appreciate now, having gone through that process, that I wouldn't be able to appreciate before. And so I still get a lot of enjoyment out of playing games and even just thinking about them from a design perspective. There's almost been a degree to where I've thought about doing reviews in some capacity, just because I enjoy the process of geeking out about mechanical design in games and thinking through how things are going to work and function from that design perspective. I don't think I'm going to end up doing that. Because again, I would much rather spend the time actually making games than talking about them. I'd say that's the dominant way I unwind. Beyond that, obviously I work. Currently I work part-time, and when I'm not working part-time and I'm not working on games, I'm usually spending time at my church, or I'm praying, reading my Bible. I'm currently in the process of trying to go through the early church fathers, and reading some of their works. Today I've been working on reading through Saint Athanasius's work on the Incarnation, and stuff like that. So those are kind of the dominant ways currently I've been spending my time. Yeah.
But Noah, let me just say, it's been an absolute blast getting you on board and chatting all things video games and more, of course. So thank you ever so much for coming on.
Yeah, I'm always happy to sit down and chat with people.
So is there anything that you'd like to say to the many Viscerafest fans out there?
I honestly don't know that there is. I feel like I'm pretty active within the context of the community of just talking with people, and I like randomly appearing in people's streams. So, I'm kind of always talking, and as a result, I feel like unless you have a conversation with me, I don't really have a ton of stuff to say. Obviously, like I mentioned, we're currently in the midst of working on the new game plus mode. We're going to be adding the what is it? We're going to be working on the bonus levels once that's done. And I'm hoping my composer, John S. Weekly, will be getting back to me sometime within this next month here, so we can finally wrap up the OST, and then we'll be able to, 1, put it into the actual game, and 2, release it on public platforms like YouTube, Spotify, etc., etc. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, there's not a ton. So just, the stuff that, like I mentioned earlier, that we're currently working on, and it's all stuff I hope people really enjoy. I hope people really love. Like I've been pouring my heart into the game for literally half of my lifetime, because I'm 25 now, and I've been working on it since I was 12. So if anything, more than half my lifetime, way too much time. So I hope the people who play it really love it and really enjoy it. But yeah, regardless, I hope everyone has a good day, and God bless them.
And I'd also like to thank the wonderful listeners tuning into this great interview on the Cyberden. Even when Siren Radio is completely gone now, at least the Cyberden lives on with Witham Radio, so please check out the Witham Radio website. Please consider donating to the cause so we can get ourselves back on the radio itself as an actual entity, playing music and getting the Cyberden on board with me, chit-chatting about news and all sorts and getting more interviews, etc. Please check this stuff out, folks. And thank you, of course, very much for checking out the first interview in a year from the Cyberden. So Noah, let me just say thank you ever so much for coming on board. Best of luck with pretty much anything and everything, all your future endeavors, and especially can't wait for more Viscerafest, hopefully coming in the near future.
Yeah. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Awesreek, the lead developer of the single-player first-person shooter Viscerafest. Be sure to keep listening to Jake the Voice on the Cyberden.